and welcome everybody to another wonderful episode of Veterinary Tales, where we dive into the experiences and stories of the victims from medical veterinary malpractice. And these bad actors put their pride, their money, their ego, whatever it is, in front of the care of our loved ones, their patients. My name is Colleen Beasley. I am one of the hosts this evening for the podcast, joined by a wonderful co-host, Mr. Scott Fine. Scott, how are you doing this evening?
Hi, Colleen. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
Well, tonight we have a very special guest. Not only is she the vice president of the Joey's Legacy Board of Directors, but she's just also a well-rounded, lovely person and really fights for activism. And we are so excited to have Jodi Ware, who will be telling us about Lightning's story.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
So I actually have some slides, if I could show those.
Yes.
Let's see. Share screen.
We should have it now.
Okay.
And as she's setting that up, people who are joining us live, I love having people interact with us. So if you have any comments, questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We will do our best to get to them. But yeah, please be active.
Let's see. Is it up?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this was our little guy, Lightning. Lightning found me in a parking lot when we had moved to a new neighborhood. And I was actually bringing something to my son for lunch. And Lightning ran toward me as if I were his savior. And I didn't need a dog. I didn't want a dog. We already had a dog. And the dog that we had was a special needs dog. So we were concerned about adding another member to our family. So we put up signs and we did everything we could to find him a home. And when nobody claimed him, he became ours. And my son is the one who christened him Lightning Bolt. So his name became Lightning Beware, which was prophetic, it turns out. Lightning was a lab mix, as you can probably tell. He grew to be 70 pounds. So he was a big boy. He was a typical lab. A yellow lab. Our other dog, Stella, was a black lab, and Lightning was a great addition to the family. The boys loved him, and we had two dogs. Stella eventually came to love him. She didn't love him initially, but at about 2 years of age, Lightning developed orthopedic disease, or I should say, he developed manifestations of orthopedic disease. So he had juvenile onset hip dysplasia, as well as a medial patella luxation, which you can see here in this slide. So those three things were diagnosed in March of 2013. So he was having difficulty rising, bunny hopping, the typical symptoms that you associate with hip dysplasia. We took him to our general practitioner. She suspected the diagnosis and she sent us to a specialist to confirm the diagnosis. The specialist indeed confirmed the diagnosis and recommended a series of surgeries. So first, he recommended a right hip replacement, which was performed in April of 2013, again, when Lightning was 2 years old. Then after his right hip replacement, the plan was to continue on the opposite side. And when they did the opposite side, the goal was to do the hip replacement and the knee at the same time, the knee being the patella. So you can see in the picture above the March 2013 at the bottom, the round circle that's sort of above and over the femur. It should be on top of the femur like it is on the right side. Well, when you're looking at it, it's opposite. At any rate, he was going to fix the medial patella luxation at the same time he fixed the hip. However, Lightning developed a new, almost imperceptible lameness on his right side, which was the same side the hip was had been replaced on. So, I was very careful watching him, wasn't sure what it was, took him back to the surgeon, and the surgeon referred him to a knee specialist, his colleague. The knee specialist diagnosed bilateral cruciate tears in July, so a few months later, and he recommended, it was a hasty visit, so it was an add-on visit. We went in to see the hip specialist. The hip specialist referred us to the knee specialist. The knee specialist was busy, a very, very busy practice, very well-respected practice, in fact, world-renowned, I would say. They do more cruciate surgeries than anywhere else in the country. So it was an add-on visit. The knee surgeon very hastily told us he would perform minimally invasive arthroscopic cruciate repairs. So I took that to mean like in humans, because that's how you describe what happens in humans. And my husband had just had a cruciate repair. So I thought I knew what was going to happen. And the way that he described it suggested it was going to be an arthroscopic procedure, again, minimally invasive. I then went home pretty upset about the change of plan, not sure I wanted to do it. There was a sense of urgency imparted. His technician said he just so happened to have a cancellation on Friday afternoon, which was 36 hours later. And if I wanted to get the spot, I needed to make a decision right away. So I went home, I discussed it with my husband. I actually looked up the practice and did a little bit of research, and I found a newspaper article about it. And they also spoke to this minimally invasive arthroscopic technology that they had. And they even said it's almost just like in humans. So again, I just assumed it would be like in humans. I wrongly thought that. At any rate, the surgeon's words, the fact that he was world renowned, the newspaper article confirming it, I just decided to go ahead and proceed. Lightning was in pain, and I wanted to treat his pain, and I made a tragic mistake. So this was the authorization and release. They call it a consent. It was 1 page. As you can see, it's a commitment for payment and legal release. This is not a consent. I was given nothing else, no written materials, no information about what was going to be done. I saw right stifle arthroscopy right there in the middle. I didn't see what was right below it. So in July, he had a right cruciate repair. That is not the X-ray, because I did not see the X-ray until a very long time afterward. He had persistent problems on the right, and I kept trying to tell the surgeon this problem or that problem, and I felt like they kept being marginalized, my concerns, and we kept being referred back to the general practitioner. Well, the general practitioner didn't perform the surgery, so the general practitioner wasn't going to be able to treat the various complications that he had. He was never right on the right after that. Because things were challenging, I attribute it to a bad fit in communicating with the doctor and just decided to go elsewhere. So we transferred Lightning to the university, and at the university, they focused on the left side. And so they decided to perform a cruciate surgery on the left side. They actually, by then I understood what had happened on the right side, or I thought I understood what had happened on the right side. The surgeon, because he's world renowned and because he teaches courses, I saw that he taught courses for this procedure called tibial plateau leveling osteotomy, or Tplo. So what that is they cut the bone and they reorient the joint with a plate and screws. And I didn't know this. So my dog comes home from surgery, and I didn't know that they actually cut his tibia and put it back together with a plate and screws. But at any rate, by the time he went to the university, I did know this because I was so confused as to what had happened on the right. And you'll see that I was still confused as to what happened on the right as we proceed. So on the left, he had that procedure. He had a tibial plateau leveling osteotomy, and he also had his patelloluxation treated. And this was the first surgery that was done. And so you can see there how his bone was cut and put back together with the plate and screws. And then the pin above the knee is the patelloluxation surgery. And unfortunately, the patelloluxation surgery failed, and he had to have a revision of that. And so he had a second patelloluxation surgery. You can see here the new pin and tension band. So you can see the differences between the two of those. So after that, we were done. Like, we were just not going back to see orthopedists. He'd had 4 bone cutting surgeries in 14 months, and it just was not helping, and it was definitely hurting. So we took a break. And Lightning continued to have problems, principally on the right, and we couldn't make sense of it. His right side was fixed by the best. We couldn't figure it out. We blamed other joints. We blamed the weather. I had actually changed general practitioners because we needed a GP who was available pretty much 24/7. And the first GP that we had was only working a couple of days a week. She was only part-time. Lightning needed care all the time. So the new GP also was confused and didn't know what happened on the right. And again, we reasoned he'd been seen by the best, that had been treated by the best, the left had been treated at the university, potentially by students. We just weren't sure what was going on. So we kept increasing his pain meds, and I was certain it was the right. Every time he walked, he would jerk his leg up. But again, you convince yourself of anything. So after about a year or two, Lightning was continuing to decline, and he was on a lot of medicine. And eventually, here he is after one of his surgeries. Eventually we actually saw a behavioral specialist because he started being aggressive. And this poor guy, we'd been to the vets so many times, just trying to get to the bottom of this and making no headway. Oops, sorry. So in January of 2016, he went abruptly and severely lame and painful. And the first week of February, it was late January, he was getting worse. First week of February, he went abruptly and severely lame and painful. And so our GP took x-rays finally, and this is what she saw. And she couldn't explain it. And the radiologist couldn't explain it. Nobody could explain it. Nobody knew what that was. So we tried to get in back at the university, and that was a 2-month wait. So we couldn't go there, and we had to return to the surgeon who performed the surgery. So I told my husband he had to take off work and he had to go with me. I needed somebody else there. I needed a second set of eyes and ears, for this visit. So we went, and the surgeon told us that the implants were normal and that it was something else. And he prescribed 2 weeks of at-home physical therapy and a new supplement, and sent us on our way. And we were disappointed. We knew that wasn't going to help. Lightning had been on a whole host of supplements, and none of them had made a dent. And we just kept looking at that screw. So we knew it was time to begin the euthanasia discussion with our sons. And our sons at this point were, in 16, they were 11 and 8. So, they wanted to try to do more. And we actually found somebody else to see Lightning. And he took films, and these are the films that he took. And what he thought happened was that Lightning had a late meniscal tear, which was a complication of this surgery that had been performed, the surgery being Cblo, not Tplo. And he suggested treating the late meniscal tear and trying to remove the implants while in there. He did not have any explanation as to why a Cblo had been performed. This was 2.5 years later. Lightning was tortured for 2.5 years. And this surgeon, a board certified specialist as well, still didn't perform the procedure. It was so new. So he he recommended that we return to the original surgeon because the original surgeon was the one who was familiar with the procedure, and the original surgeon would probably be best equipped to treat it, but I was not comfortable returning to the original surgeon at this point. So we asked him to treat the late meniscal tear and to see what he could do about those implants. And unfortunately, he couldn't get the screw out because it was buried in the bone. So the point of this screw is actually for it to be inside the bone. The tip is meant to be in the bone as well. So it's called a headless compression screw. It was a human implant that was used in Lightning at a time when the procedure was still very, very new and investigational, and they had just incorporated it. They didn't follow the technique guide. So there is a technique guide for the human headless compression screw, and they failed to follow that. And so we were stuck with this. And again, just grasping at straws, we then proceeded with a course of physical therapy, thinking that might help, and it did not. So, we're going through this whole thing. I'm trying to sort what is going on. How did this happen? I just have no idea. I'm really confused. So I got a copy of the medical record, and I did this before there was really much opportunity to make any changes, thankfully. And as you can see, the medical record speaks to a study in that square up at the top, a Tplo study. The medical record refers interchangeably to Tplo and Cblo, and you can see that Cblo is written in. So it appeared my dog had been used for a study. And of course, I didn't give permission for him to be used for a study. I would not have given permission for him to be used for a study given all of his orthopedic disease. The only thing I wanted Lightning to have was tried and true treatment. And the surgeon told me he had performed these minimally invasive arthroscopic cruciate repairs 15 times per week. This was obviously not a minimally invasive arthroscopic cruciate repair. So just to give you an idea, Tplo is the conventional procedure that's used. This is also not a minimally invasive arthroscopic cruciate repair. Arthroscopy is used, but arthroscopy is used to clean out the joint before the bone is cut and then put back together with implants. So there is an incision, and I didn't mention this, but I questioned the fact that there was an incision when the bandage fell off. And I was told that it was because they needed a small incision to fit the plate and screws. And this is sort of what led me to believe that it had been a Tplo that had been performed, that combined with the fact that the surgeon taught Tplo. So with a Tplo, they cut the bone from about 12 o'clock to about 3 o'clock, and they rotate it backward. So you can see there, it's already rotated backward there. Cblo is substantively different. They cut the bone all the way through and they rotate it forward. And because of the differences in these osteotomies, there are different biomechanics, and it causes Cblo to be much more unstable than Tplo. Believe me, I have learned so much about veterinary orthopedics that I wish I didn't know. So because it is so much more unstable, it requires more implants. So that's why they had to add that headless compression screw. Now, Lightning's Cblo was performed with a Tplo plate. So that further confused matters. So at the time his was done, they hadn't started collaborating with implant companies to make Cblo specific implants. They were just getting started doing that at the end of 2013. So their first course to teach Cblo, I believe, was in October of 2013. So Lightnings had been performed in July, and then they started teaching it to others in the fall. It was a sold out course. And around the same time, they started collaborating with an implant company to make Cblo specific implants. Actually, now they have even more implants than the plate and the screw. They add a pin and tension band as well. And they're still having challenges with it now, almost 10 years later. So this is where we were before the implants were removed in February 2016. This was after that, and Lightning continued to decline. So 9 months later, we humanely euthanized him, and we did that in our backyard. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I have some tips that I'll go through. But I wanted to get through his case first. So one thing I've done is I've interacted with a whole bunch of people, just trying to get to the bottom of this. By training, I'm an oncology pharmacy specialist. So I know drug development and I know clinical trials. I spent my career in clinical research. So I've talked to any and everyone who will listen to me to try to find answers. And unfortunately, what I've learned is that there is a gap in companion animal research. So humans are technically, and some would argue these days, but humans are technically protected through federal laws when research is performed on them. Laboratory animals are also protected through federal laws through the Animal Welfare Act. Companion animals are not. So and to add to that, in my state, unfortunately, there is not a rule or statute mandating informed consent. So, I should say, save for a few select alternative interventions like homeopathy and holistic medicine, which they label alternative. So, except for those, informed consent is not required in my state. So, there was no recourse. There was no answer to this. There's nothing that can be done. So again, I've just tried to engage various stakeholders to see, to advocate for change. And I've made a little bit of progress, not a whole lot, not satisfactory progress, but I have, I think, helped some dogs and some people. So I did write a letter to the editor of the JAVMA, which they actually published, about standards of care. I believe standards of care are grossly lacking, and there's a huge problem, especially with someone like this surgeon who could claim that he provided a higher than standard of care through his research. He did get away with it. I filed multiple complaints. I think all in, I filed 5 against him and 1 against his colleague who was the pioneer of this procedure. All were dismissed ultimately. The first one, the board hired an external specialist to review it, and the specialist actually found fault and said that he should have been, well, she didn't say. It wasn't said that he should have been disciplined, but they did find fault. The board dismissed it anyway. The second, the third, the fourth, I think it was the fifth, where they again found fault. And then he refused to agree to the order and requested a second hearing or informal conference, and they offered him that. And so after his second one, the complaint was dismissed. I wrote another paper in another journal advocating for transparency in clinical trials, and it was published in the UK. And the journal actually commissioned a leading veterinary surgeon to write a companion piece, and he wrote a very nice companion piece. I was really pleased with it, basically underlining the fact that there is no oversight over these types of clinical trials. But unfortunately, it's not just implants or surgical techniques. This also applies to off-label use of drugs. This also applies to radiotherapy. It also applies to, what else? The only thing it doesn't apply to is drugs that are seeking FDA approval for veterinary indications. So those are regulated. Those are regulated by the FDA, but everything else is fair game. And interestingly, people, it seems in the United States, many creatively designate things as devices because devices are not, they have no oversight. So, for example, a radiotherapy injected into the knee, to me, that sounds like a medicine, but they call it a device. So the device is not regulated. That was approved during COVID. There are just a number of things that can be done. And I honestly had no idea that any of this was possible until my experience. And of course, I wrote a chapter in volume 2 of Joey's Legacy, the book. So everyone, it has, in that I focus more on the lessons I learned, and it's point by point. So I hope that you all will take the time to read that. It's all about innovation, what they call innovation, cutting edge, novel, new gold standard, all of those things. Just be very cautious when those are offered to you. They weren't offered to me in that way, but I've certainly heard it called that since. So as I said, they've been teaching this procedure since 2013, and I've followed it very closely. That's where I'll end on Lightning's case. Do you have any questions about his case specifically before I move on to just some other points?
So Jodi, no one was ever really held accountable or responsible for any of this, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Continues to practice without consequence, continues to hold these courses without consequence. As I mentioned, I've interacted with a number of different people and organizations, including the new implant company that manufactures the Cblo implants. And their response to me was they would not engage me in my fact-finding mission to discredit Cblo. And I told them, if there were data, that would be to their credit. Why won't they share the data with me? So it's been published repeatedly, the data, if you want to call them data. So they've published their results as retrospective case series. So this is another creative way to publish what were actually prospective cases that were performed without research protections. So I've written to the journal editors as well. I've actually gotten in two cases, journal editors issued corrections for their undeclared conflicts of interest, the author's undeclared conflicts of interest. So I've made some headway there. I've just turned over every stone I can possibly think of, trying to mitigate risk to others. That's always been my goal. Lightning, poor Lightning, he went through so much. His pain and suffering can't be for naught.
Yeah. Do you think because of the veterinarian that performed the surgery, because they were so renowned and accredited, it made it that much more difficult to hold them responsible? Do you think that played a part in it?
Absolutely. So I think it caused me to not want to question him. I kept thinking he was the best. And so, but something just wasn't right when he kept referring me back to my general practitioner for things that he should have been treating. There was clearly a problem with communication. Clearly. I think part of that was intentional, but that's my supposition. It turns out the university that we went to is the university that is perceived as the birthplace of Cblo. So Cblo is published, again, the same cases are published over and over. They mine the same cases, same like about 100 cases, they mine them and republish different aspects of them. They've treated thousands of patients with this procedure. So they're cherry picking who they want to publish. But when they publish with A&M credentials. Sorry, I said that. They publish with the university credentials. So it looks like to any suspecting person that it was researched and developed at the university when it was not.
Mm.
So the university has actually conducted one small clinical trial. I think they enrolled 4 patients, and it was with Cblo plus a lateral suture. So it was 2 cruciate surgeries in one, to see if they could stabilize it further. Again, they're having a number of problems with stability. It's persistently unstable. Something I didn't mention is that when Lightning's meniscal tear was treated, when that specialist went in, it turned out his cruciate had progressed from an early partial cruciate tear to a complete cruciate tear, meaning it didn't even work.
Mm.
So it was all for nothing.
Wow.
So it's complicated. It's a lot. I know it's a lot to digest, especially if you don't know veterinary orthopedics. And I probably didn't present it very well, but
Well, you
No, you
presented
did
it very
very well.
nicely. Yeah, very vocal, and
Yeah.
I who don't know, I don't know much about orthopedics, especially with animals, but I mean, you also weren't really on the defense. Like, you thought you knew the procedure, but they were responsible for communicating. Like you said, there was a lack of miscommunication that caused you to not necessarily question it because of the esteemedness of their
Mhm.
practice and all that. So it's like you have to be almost like conspiratorial, otherwise you get, in these unfortunate situations.
Yeah, you have to be on the offense, actually, is
Yeah.
what I've learned. And actually, while I was going through the complaint process, the hospital had its own reality show. And that was really tough because in the reality show, he would come on and he would say, "Oh, today I'm going to be doing a first this or that. And I'm not sure if I can even do it right." And he would joke about it. And it was tough. It was really tough. And I got postcards in the mail because I was a prior client, and, their TV show is going to be on, catch it on Nat Geo. So the television shows, celebrity vets, just also be wary of that too. It's not what it seems, I can assure you.
Yeah, it's poor taste of them to pass it off of such a serious situation to anybody who's going through that. It's awful.
Yeah.
Jodi, do you have any final thoughts or tips for everybody?
Yeah, so a few things. I have a list of a couple things. Sorry, my dog, you can probably hear him barking.
Say hello.
That's Harry. So when we decided to proceed with euthanasia with Lightning, we used a group called Lap of Love. And I don't know if the members are familiar with Lap of Love, but it's a national chain of hospice and euthanasia providers that come to your house to do it. And they were really wonderful. We actually engaged them for hospice care first. And they had one visit, and we knew after one visit it was time to let them go. But I highly recommend that, as opposed to taking them to the clinic, unless you have a really great relationship with your vet and the clinic is, better for you. For us, Lap of Love was just a really nice experience. My then 11-year-old, actually, he went to school that morning. He wanted to be here for it. And he came home and he had a piece of paper in his hand, and it was folded up, and he opened it. And we said, "What is that?" And he had his friends all write little prayers to say to Lightning as he was getting the medicine. Broke my heart.
My goodness.
But it was lovely. Our younger son decided not to come home from school. He didn't want to be there for it. So Lightning was let go in his favorite place in our backyard. And I tell all friends and family, I rave about, it was a horrible situation. They did a lovely job. Also, during the thick of my complaint, the veterinary board was being reviewed by the Texas Sunset Commission. And the Sunset Commission issued a scathing review. So my complaint was dismissed. The Sunset Commission issued their review a month and a half later. And there was a period of time after that where the board was much more cooperative. And that's how I got a hold of the letter from the independent specialist. I filed open records requests. And that's another thing I recommend everybody do. File open records requests of anyone and everyone you can think if they're a governmental agency. I've filed them of the veterinary board. I filed them of the university. I filed them of the FDA. I've filed them of all the universities in the United States that have colleges of veterinary medicine. And it's been really interesting. I've gotten a lot of good information that way. One of the things I've learned is that nobody performs this procedure except, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few perform it except in Texas and I think Mississippi maybe. But even at the university where it was reportedly pioneered, they still, as of the last count that I had, they still had performed less than 100, I believe, compared to Tplo that they've performed over 1,000 in the same period. So in the 10 plus years it's been out, they've not done very many. And I actually went and met with the university. I met with the head of the orthopedics group and was told that they refer these cases out to private practice, to the pioneers to do them there. So they don't do that many there. But at any rate, file open records requests, learn how to do it. Once you get it down, keep a spreadsheet, because most states have a period of time during which the open records requests need to be fulfilled. So in my state, it's 10 business days. So I try to keep track so I can hound them if I need to, because if they don't provide the information, it's a violation of the Public Information Act in my state. Now, not every state is open, but most are, I believe. Your veterinary board, as difficult as it is, I encourage you to attend meetings, track activities, watch your Secretary of State page or wherever it is that they propose rule changes, provide input on rule changes, report them to anyone and everyone you can think of. I've reported them to the Sunset Commission, the governor, the attorney general, the state auditor, the Texas Ethics Commission. I don't know that it's made a huge difference, but I feel better about it. Engage state and federal legislators. So not only your state, and try to learn the difference. So it can be confusing. So you have state and you have federal senators and representatives, and your state ones are more local to you, obviously. And there's a website where you can look up who is your representative, and it'll tell you who your state representatives are and who your federal representatives are. So federal is a lot harder, obviously. State, you can go and you can testify on bills, since I've testified on many bills on for or against, depending on what they are. They've largely been bills that are borne by the Texas Veterinary Medical Association or the board, even though the board is not supposed to propose bills. The board definitely is behind some of them. So I and various other advocates in Texas try to do our best to be there to testify on these bills. We also testify in writing, so that's easy. Always testify in writing, and then try to testify in person. It makes a big difference to be there in person. Engage others. So I've talked to veterinary professionals. I've talked to human healthcare professionals. I've talked to the ACVS, which is the organization that board certifies surgeons, veterinary surgeons. I've emailed with the AVMA. I've contacted journalists. So I constantly review the news, and I write to anyone who has a story where I can find any sort of connection. I follow the literature, and I write to journal editors when I identify problems with articles. Like I said, some of my victories include getting the corrections on their conflicts of interest. That to me was worth pursuing. On social media, write reviews. If you write reviews, be very factual or be very clear when you're stating your opinion. I recommend including pictures. My picture of Lightning's radiograph became the profile picture for the veterinary hospital for about 2 years. So when you looked up the hospital on Yelp, you saw that radiograph. Every time it got looked up, you couldn't avoid it. It was there. I also included his medical record annotated. So, as I showed you all, you can do things like that. That's factual, and pictures get attention. I also have Cblo pages. So I've created an Instagram page. I've created a YouTube channel. I do my best to balance the information out there with what I call fair balance. So, there are a lot of claims that are unsubstantiated, and I try to point that out and share my experience and the experience of others who give me permission to use their cases. There are some very large support groups. So if your animal has a condition, you can find a support group on Facebook. There are cruciate surgery support groups that have probably collectively 40,000 members. So I'm a member of those, and I keep an eye out. And when somebody's considering this procedure, I pipe up and again provide some facts to balance the claims. To this day, there have been no controlled clinical trials published. So that one clinical trial with the 4 patients that I mentioned, that hasn't been published yet. I don't know if it will be. I have 4 patients is mighty low. So again, I just try to be really factual and speak to the data, the actual data, and steer them in another direction if I can. I've become much more medically conservative. I don't go to the veterinarian for anything unless it persists. It's actually to the point where my husband will say to me, "Don't you think we need to take Gus in for this or that?" Because I really hesitate. And I've been really nervous about specialists in particular. My case involved a specialist. I have a lot of anxiety about it. I can't even imagine if it were my general practitioner. Like I said, I changed. So my general practitioner was not the same general practitioner I had when he first underwent this surgery. She knows my situation. She's terrific. She shares in decision-making with me. She always discusses. She shares all the labs. She sends me emails. We text. There was one instance where I actually boarded the dogs for a very short period of time. May have been a day, may have been overnight. And Gus was not fed properly. So he was fed half the amount of food that he should have been fed. And I had concerns about it because of what was returned to me. And she actually took photographs of the chart and sent it to me. And she said, "We made a mistake." And of course, she was honest. They made a mistake. Mistakes happen. I got over it very quickly. But it was just a reminder that, there are people you can trust. And I don't know. It's tough. I do also feel like you always have to be on the offense, like I said, but I feel fortunate that I have a good general practitioner and we have a good relationship. So I think that's it, unless anyone has any questions.
Do we have any
How are we?
questions, Colleen?
How are we
No.
time? Sorry, we're 47 minutes.
No questions, but everyone's sending their love and support and just sharing that how awful it is that you've had to deal with this and all that you've learned, not only your advocacy, but also just the medical knowledge behind it and everything is just, it's incredible, but it's also heartbreaking under the circumstances that you had to prepare yourself in such a manner.
Yeah, well, I have to do it for him, right?
And absolutely. And the
And for all the
radiographs
others.
you furnished really tied the whole story together. It makes it a lot, for the purposes of clarity, it makes it a lot easier to understand. And I know you're a great animal advocate. You're pursuing whatever you can pursue on behalf of companion animals. And I'm really honored to have you in the group, Jodi, and as vice president of the board.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap it here, and we'll see you guys next Sunday night for Joey's Legacy Roundtable. You'll have a good night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night.